Marcus Hale felt the cold click echo sharply when the boarding pass scanner flashed red, a sound as precise as an accusation. The passengers behind him hesitated, not because they recognized him, but because of the metallic tension radiating from the flight attendant's sudden silence. 2 seconds of standing still at Gate 14 of Seattle-Tacoma Airport were enough for Marcus to understand that the familiar storm had returned. He straightened his back like a steel column holding up a cracking space. His deep navy suit framed his tall build with rigid precision, yet his eyes carried a cautiousness sculpted through 26 years of unspoken stares. "I'm sorry, the system is having a small issue." The gate agent's voice was polite, but her eyes told a different story. Marcus said nothing, only nodded and walked through. His footsteps echoed through the jet bridge like memories replaying themselves, each strike weighted by the past. When he stepped into first class, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The scent of expensive leather, the warm, golden lighting, the familiar faces of people who believed they belonged here, effortlessly. And then she appeared. Hannah Boyd, blonde hair pulled tight, expression sharp as glass. Her polite smile lifted only one corner, as if too much warmth would be wasteful. Her glance at Marcus was not meant to observe, but to judge. "Boarding pass, sir." Her voice was neither soft nor harsh, but tense enough to pull the air taut like an over-tightened string. Marcus hesitated for half a second. The procedure did not require a second check. He knew it. She knew it. Everyone who had ever flown first class knew it. But he said nothing. He pulled out his pass slowly, intentionally, letting her see that he followed every rule always did. She looked, glanced again, sharper this time. Her lips hardened. "Seat 2A. She tilted her head with visible reluctance, as if she did not believe what she saw. Marcus simply nodded politely. Passengers began to notice. Derek Collins in seat 2 bee-eyed Marcus with a mix of doubt and the smug certainty of someone who assumed he understood more than the person beside him. Behind them, a young woman named Mia set up her phone on a small tripod, the recording light glowing red. This time, Marcus did not know that the world outside this cabin was about to witness everything. He was no longer fighting alone. As he lifted his suitcase into the overhead bin, he heard approaching footsteps, sharp and familiar. Hannah returned quickly, her heels striking the floor like hammer blows. "So please let me see your identification." This time, Marcus turned fully, his dark eyes still and deep, like stones resting at the bottom of a lake. "You already checked my boarding pass. It is just an additional step. Recently there have been some errors in the list." Her voice hinted at something else she swallowed back just in time. The words errors in the list prickled Marcus like needles. He handed over his ID. She held it up, tilted it, compared it exactly the way someone had done 26 years ago. "Brent, the man in seat 2? B muttered, "Probably a last-minute upgrade." Marcus turned his head slightly, his voice dropping into an icy calm. "I paid for this seat, just like you." Brent fell silent, cheeks burning. But the reason the cabin grew silent was not what Marcus said. It was how he said it, a quiet so sharp it felt dangerous. Not the silence of patience, but of decades of being treated like an outsider. A silence that could shatter things. Mia watched with widening eyes. The injustice unfolding inches from her hands had become evidence the kind Marcus and people like him never had in the past. Then the real explosion came. Hannah returned a third time. This time she brought a young flight attendant named Evan, his face pale with tension. "Mr. Hale, there appears to be a discrepancy in the list. Please step to the galley for further verification. Marcus straightened. I am not going anywhere. His voice was not loud, but it was so precise that Evan froze mid-step. The entire cabin felt drained of oxygen. Evan tried again. It is just to ensure there is nothing to ensure. Marcus turned in his seat, meeting Evan's eyes directly. This is not standard procedure, and you know that. Evan swallowed hard. Hannah tightened her grip on the papers in her hand, like she needed something to hold her shrinking authority together. From the back of the cabin, Mia whispered, "Oh my God, this is discrimination." Her live stream view count surged, but Marcus still did not know that the wave had already rolled far outside the aircraft. In that moment, Marcus felt the past tearing open like an old wound, the announcement calling his name 26 years earlier, the contempt in their eyes, the hand dragging him out of a first-class seat, even though he held a valid ticket. The face of the trainee that day, and that face stood before him now. Hannah. Her. The old pain twisted inside Marcus, but he was no longer the 23-year-old engineer with a wrinkled blazer. He was the chief executive officer of the system this airline depended on for survival. He had power, but what deepened his gaze was not power. It was the question burning inside him, why after 26 years had nothing changed. Marcus inhaled slowly. The cabin lights reflected in his eyes like metal heating to a glow. And Hannah trembled. Not because she recognized her mistake, but because somewhere in her memory, the image of the young man she once humiliated was rising to the surface, just as Mia lifted her phone higher, her live stream now watched by thousands. At the center of it all, Marcus Hale understood one thing. This time he would not stand up. He would not leave his seat. He would not stay silent. And the moment he tightened his hand around the armrest of Seat 2A was the moment the American aviation system began to shake, because for the first time, the man who had carried this humiliation for 26 years had chosen to fight. And the whole world was about to witness it. Marcus had no idea that the moment he refused to stand was the exact point where the entire first-class cabin felt as if it had been severed from the outside world. Hannah Boyd stood frozen in front of him, her hand turning pale as it squeezed her clipboard, her breathing sharp and uneven like someone pushed to the edge of a cliff. Evan Pierce stood behind her, wearing the expression of a man who had never witnessed a black man say, "No," with such pride inside a space built for those who were assumed to belong. Whispers spread across the cabin, brushing against every seat and every widened eye. An older woman in the front row murmured, "This is not protocol." A young man in the back leaned over his phone, whispering, "Are you watching the live stream? The girl in row 4 is recording everything." And Marcus felt every beat of his heart pounding like a metal drum. Each strike echoed deep into the memory he carried to the place where he could still smell the old airplane from the year 1999, feel the wrinkled leather seats, and see the cold eyes of the trainee who had stamped a permanent scar onto his life. "So you need to comply," Hannah forced out, but her voice trembled like a string pulled too tight. She no longer had control. She was clinging to it. Marcus lifted his head, his gaze sharp enough to cut like a laser. "Comply," he repeated. One simple word, but when he spoke, it became a blade slicing through the air between them. Evan inhaled shakily, trying to intervene. We just need to verify." Marcus turned in his seat and stared directly into his eyes. "You know this is not verification. This is an assumption. The assumption that I do not belong in this seat." Evan froze, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. Hannah whipped around toward the back, her voice snapping like a needle jab. "You stop recording the crew." Mia Alvarez did not blink. The red recording light on her phone glowed like a tiny warning flare. "I am not recording, crew," Maya said softly, but her words carried through the entire cabin. "I am recording a moment in America." The sentence hit the silence like a hand striking stone. Hannah stiffened her lips, pressed tight, as if this was the first time someone refused to bow to her authority. Evan turned to Marcus again, as if trying to speak, but he was trapped between fear and a dawning recognition that the man before him was not someone to be handled casually. And then everything fell into a thick, breathless pause. Marcus closed his eyes for a single second. Just one. But in that second, the floodgates of his past burst open, the security guard's footsteps dragging him from his seat long ago. His mother's tired voice saying, "It is all right, baby. You will find your place again." The job interviews, where he saw the recruiter's eyes slide down his resume, searching for a reason to reject him. The years he worked twice as hard, only to receive half the acknowledgement. He opened his eyes. "Then let me help you," he said, his voice dropping low, like the ocean holding back a rising wave. Marcus took out his phone. A simple movement, but when the screen lit up, the entire cabin felt drained of air. The blue glow sharpened every contour of his calm and unshakable face. The text on the screen made Evan gasp. "Oh my God, Aerosync Helios Core Echo Mode, stand by." Hannah jerked as if struck by electricity. Suddenly she understood the power this man held. What are you planning to do?" she stammered. Marcus placed the phone gently on his thigh, his eyes never leaving hers. "Do you know what Echo Mode is?" The question did not need an answer. Everyone knew she did not know. Evan knew, or at least he had heard enough rumors. "It will shut down everything," Evan whispered, his voice cracking. "Check in boarding baggage identity data. The entire system will collapse." A man in seat 3C gasped. A woman covered her mouth. Someone else said, "He is not just a passenger." Marcus spoke calmly. "I designed Helios. I left the empty slot in the protective code, and I am the only person with the authority and the ability to activate Echo." He paused, letting the air thicken. "And I sit in seat 2A because I paid for it. No one has the right to remove me from it." The cabin's heartbeat stretched thin, every gaze locked onto Marcus as if he were radiating light. But the thing truly glowing was the truth finally freed, no longer buried under uniforms or hierarchy. Then the unthinkable happened. Hannah's earpiece beeped sharply. Hannah speaking, she answered, her voice shaking. "What is happening?" The response came through with panic, tension, and unmistakable fear. Is a passenger named Marcus Hale activating Echo?" Hannah stared at Marcus. "Yes." She swallowed hard. "He says he is the CEO of Aerosync." 3 full seconds of silence followed. Then, "My God, what are you doing over there?" "He is Aerosync." The captain's voice cracked like a verdict delivered from the sky. "If he activates Echo, the entire North Star system collapses in 10 minutes. Call headquarters immediately. Do not do anything else." Hannah stood paralyzed, her legs threatening to buckle. Evan looked at Marcus with a mixture of awe and fear. Mia raised her phone higher, her live stream crossing 60,000 viewers, and Marcus simply sat there, straight-backed, steady, like a man fully aware that the world was tilting because of the force he created. But inside him was not revenge. It was the echo of a 23-year-old boy pulled from his seat, under the weight of contemptuous stares. This time he didn't stand. He did not yield. He did not let them force him out of the place he belonged. When Hannah stepped back, 3 trembling steps, Marcus spoke a single sentence, one that froze the entire cabin like stone. Now we begin telling the truth. The storm had formed, and nothing, not even the night sky outside the window, could stop it. The moment Marcus said, "Now we begin telling the truth," the first-class cabin stretched so tight it felt as if a single sharp breath could shatter it. Hannah Boyd stepped back, her hands, unsure where to rest, while Evan Pierce stood frozen, his wide eyes reflecting the terrifying realization that the fate of an entire airline now hung by a thread. Every passing second sent Mia Alvarez's live stream view count surging higher, 87,000, 93,000, 102,000 viewers. The outside world was witnessing a confrontation no airline on Earth would ever want. And at the center of the storm sat a man whose calm face was more frightening than anger, Marcus Hale. Mr. Hale Evan tried his voice, trembling so badly each syllable sounded ready to break. Please stay calm. We are only following procedure." Marcus tilted his head, his cold gaze slicing across Evan and landing straight on the fear in the young man's chest. "If it is truly procedure," he said, "then tell me which procedure requires checking a boarding pass twice, which procedure requires verifying identification after it has already been approved, which procedure requires removing a paying first-class passenger with a valid name from his seat." Evan swallowed hard. Sweat gathered under his collar. He wanted to answer, he truly did. But the truth was simple, there was no such procedure. Hannah jumped in, desperate to reclaim control like someone trying to grab a rope slipping through her hands. "We are only performing a secondary check because first-class seats have a high rate of mix-ups," Marcus cut in his voice, sharp and quick like a razor. "Or because by default you believe I could not possibly be the one who paid for this seat." The words slapped Hannah so hard she visibly flinched. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. Behind them, a man in row 3 muttered just loudly enough for everyone to hear. She assumed he was not the type of passenger who belongs in first class. That whisper, small as a spark, ignited a wave of tense murmurs across the cabin. But the chaos was not from noise. It came from eyes avoiding each other, from breaths held too tightly, from cheeks reddening as passengers realized they too had once looked at Marcus the same way. Marcus rested his hand lightly on his phone, the Helios interface, glowing like an electronic heart, waiting for a command. "Who do you think I am?" he asked, his voice low enough that everyone had to fall silent to hear it. Hannah inhaled sharply, as if bracing herself on the edge of a cliff. You said you are the Chief Executive Officer of Aerosync Systems, but documentation proof You want me to prove I am myself," Marcus said with a soft laugh, gentle but deadly. He tapped the screen. A single tap froze the entire cabin. "He is opening echo mode," Evan whispered in shock. Hannah stumbled backward, as if the phone might explode. But echo mode was not an explosive weapon. It was a technological one, and far, far more dangerous. "Echo mode," Marcus said slowly, "is the shutdown protocol. In 8 minutes after activation, North Star Airways will lose check-in capabilities. In every airport, all flights will be frozen. Identity systems will collapse. Baggage transfers will stop, and hundreds of thousands of passengers will be stranded. The only sound in the cabin was the frantic beating of people's hearts. Evan's face drained of color. Please do not activate it." "I have not," Marcus replied. but I want to know why I am expected to leave the seat I purchased." From the back, Mia spoke loudly. "Because they do not think you look like someone who belongs here." Several passengers stiffened, turning their heads to look at her, then at Marcus. They could no longer escape the truth. Hannah trembled her chest, rising and falling too quickly to hold steady. "I did not mean it that way. Didn't mean it." Marcus said, his voice as solid as stone. "You did the exact same thing 26 years ago." No one understood at first, but Hannah did. Instantly, as if someone had stabbed straight into the memory she had buried for nearly 3 decades. You are." Marcus snapped his fingers softly. "The young engineer you wrote up as agitated before security dragged him out of seat 4A on the Atlanta to Chicago flight in the year 1999. Hannah collapsed into the nearest seat. Evan stared at her, as if he could not believe what he had just heard. Marcus looked at her, his gaze not hateful, but unbearably wounded. "You do not remember." "But I do, because you wrote only a few words, and I had to live with them." Hannah covered her face, her shoulders shaking. For the first time during the flight, first class was no longer a place of luxury. It was a place of truth. A raw, painful truth no one could deny. As Hannah folded under the weight of it, Evan's headset crackled. "Pierce report." The captain's voice boomed loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Evan spoke quickly, terrified that every second would push the airline closer to collapse. "Captain, he really is Marcus Hale, and he can activate echo mode at any moment." 3 long seconds of silence followed. Then, the captain's voice broke, full of panic. "Maintain the scene. Do not escalate. Headquarters is connecting now. The North Star CEO wants to speak to him directly." The words hit the cabin heavier than thunder. Hannah lifted her red eyes. Evan stepped back, and Marcus, the man dragged from his seat in 1999, sat tall and steady, no shaking, no fear. He was no longer the one being scrutinized, no longer the young engineer in a cheap blazer. He was the man the entire system now had to stop and answer to. When Marcus's phone buzzed with the incoming call from North Star headquarters, the cabin held its breath. Those seconds stretched like an entire universe. Marcus looked at the screen, then placed his finger over the accept button. "All right," he said. "Let us see what they want to say." And when the voice of the North Star CEO echoed through the cabin, everyone on board understood that the real battle, the battle of justice, memory, and respect, had only just begun. The moment the word "connected" appeared on the screen, the entire first-class cabin seemed to freeze. Every sound, every breath, every heartbeat slowed for a single suspended instant, an instant in which an entire aviation system placed its fate into the hands of a man sitting in seat 2A. The face of North Star Airways CEO Jason Merrick appeared on the screen, his salt and pepper hair disheveled, his tie crooked as if he had been dragged out of an emergency meeting only seconds earlier. Behind him, the tense faces of the legal and technical teams filled the background, their frantic movements jarring the video feed itself. Mr. Hale Jason began his voice, unsteady, but trying to maintain the composure expected of a man responsible for tens of thousands of employees. Marcus cut him off instantly. "Are you calling to apologize, or are you calling to stop echo mode a direct strike?" A blade cleaving the air between them. And Jason knew immediately this was not a conversation for soothing. This was judgment. "I, on behalf of North Star, sincerely apologize for what occurred on this flight," Jason said, trying to sound calm, though his eyes revealed desperation. Silence followed. heavy, loaded silence. And in that silence, Marcus held all the power. Not just, "What occurred?" Mr. Merrick. Marcus replied, his voice low but weighted. "This is not an incident. This is a pattern, a habit, a sickness." Jason swallowed, struggling to steady his breath. "I understand, and I take full responsibility." Marcus continued. "Do you know how many times in the last 26 years I have had to prove I am not a suspect? How many times I have been treated as someone who does not belong in a seat I paid for? How many times people like Mitz Boyd here held small positions of authority that were still enough to inflict enormous wounds? Hannah Boyd stood in front of them, as if being pierced by each word. Every sentence hit her like a collapsing weight pressing down on her chest. Jason noticed her choked sob and understood things were worse than he imagined. But Marcus was not done. In the year 1999, he said, staring straight into the camera, "I was pulled out of my first-class seat because a flight attendant claimed I was agitated." One word, a single word, and it followed me for 26 years. The video feed trembled. The team behind Jason exchanged horrified looks. Hannah broke into tears, but Marcus did not need her tears. And today the same person, the same behavior, the same doubt repeated. Mr. Hale, Jason's voice shook. "Please, tell me, what do you want?" The question was an open surrender. Marcus remained silent for 3 long seconds, long enough for the entire cabin to hold its breath, long enough for everyone to understand that he was not seeking revenge. He was demanding justice. "I want 3 things," Marcus said, his voice as firm as a pillar being driven into stone. "And I want them carried out immediately while I am still sitting in seat 2A. Jason nodded, having no room to refuse. First, Marcus said, "I want the immediate public suspension of Hannah Boyd. Public, not internal, not after the flight. Now." Hannah collapsed into a seat as if her bones had turned to dust. Evan turned away, unable to look at her. Several passengers covered their mouths in shock. Jason closed his eyes, but still answered, "Agreed. Effective immediately." Second, Marcus continued, "I want an independent investigation into all first-class incidents for the last 5 years. Every report, every complaint, every forced seat removal, and I want the results made public." The legal team behind Jason objected with frantic gestures, but he only shook his head. "Agreed." Marcus nodded slightly, though his eyes did not soften. Finally, he said, "I want an independent passenger reporting channel, one that does not go through flight attendants, does not go through the cabin manager, does not go through anyone on the aircraft. A system where a passenger's voice cannot be silenced." Jason barely paused. Approved. The cabin erupted in stunned whispers. But Marcus was not finished. "And I want North Star to announce all 3 actions immediately from the airline's official account, right now, without delay. Otherwise, Echo Mode goes live." This time, Jason said nothing. He motioned sharply to his team. The screen shook. Headquarters staff rushed their keyboards. Statements were drafted, verified, and sent. Then passengers' phones chimed all at once, a chorus of transformation. North Star Airways announces the suspension of lead attendant Hannah Boyd. Initiates a 5-year independent investigation. Establishes an independent passenger reporting channel. The cabin felt electrified. Some passengers cried, some recorded. Others simply stared at Marcus as if they were witnessing history. Marcus turned toward Hannah. She stood shaking eyes, swollen red hands trembling. But he said nothing. He did not need to. Justice had spoken, not through shouting, but through the weight of the seat he chose not to leave. Jason exhaled heavily. "Mr. Hale, we have done as you asked. Is there anything else?" Marcus looked into the screen, and in his eyes was something not rooted in rage or triumph, but in the buried pain of 26 years breaking through the surface. "I want," he said slowly, "to ensure that after today, no 23-year-old will spend a lifetime carrying a wound caused by one doubtful glance." Jason bowed his head. "I understand." The call ended. The cabin remained silent, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of recognition, of truth, of respect for the man who had just brought an entire corporation to its knees. Evan stepped closer, whispering, "Thank you for not staying silent." Marcus looked at him briefly. "Silence always has a cost," he said, "but not everyone can afford to pay it." And in that moment, under the soft golden lights of the first-class cabin, a new chapter in American aviation history began, not with the engines of a Boeing 787, but with the voice of a man who refused to leave the seat he rightfully owned. The moment the connection to North Star headquarters cut off the entire first-class cabin, sank into a strange stillness, no longer the explosive tension from earlier, but the quiet of hearts that had just witnessed a man stand against an entire system simply to keep the seat that belonged to him. The Boeing 787 continued gliding through thick layers of cloud, yet inside it, every passenger felt they had just lived through an earthquake. Evan Pierce stepped back, his arms hanging loose, his chest rising and falling, with a mixture of shame and awe. Hannah Boyd leaned against the cabin wall like someone whose life force had been drained. Her fingers dug into the edge of a seat until her knuckles turned white. Her face was streaked with mascara smudged by tears. Marcus's words echoed in her mind like heavy bells you do not remember. "But I do. Because you wrote only a few words, and I had to live with them." That sentence did more than shatter her confidence. It shattered 26 years of believing she had always done the right thing. And there was one more truth no one in the cabin knew. Inside Marcus's mind, at this moment, was not triumph spinning, but memory. A memory he had tried to lock away for nearly 3 decades. He opened the black leather case beneath his seat, unzipping it slowly as if he were reopening the wound itself. Passengers tried to look without looking. A middle-aged man leaned toward his wife and whispered, What is he taking out?" Marcus pulled out an old sheet of paper folded into quarters yellowed with age. The edges were worn, proof that it had been kept touched and wrestled with countless times. He unfolded it, each crease cracking softly in the still air. And when the words appeared, Hannah felt pierced straight through. Passenger appeared agitated, recommended for removal, filed by trainee Hannah Boyd. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening with horror. Marcus raised the paper to her eye level, his gaze cold but not vengeful, the gaze of someone deeply wounded, demanding the one who caused the pain to finally look at it. "Do you remember this signature?" Marcus asked, his voice soft, but as heavy as stone. Hannah stepped closer with difficulty, each step feeling like a verdict. She took the paper with both trembling hands, eyes scanning the line, then the tiny handwritten signature at the bottom. The handwriting of a 19-year-old girl, neat but devoid of empathy. Hannah's voice cracked like shattered glass. I do not remember writing this," Marcus answered without looking at her. "But I remember every second." No one in the cabin moved. No one breathed deeply. Passengers who had once seemed distant now looked at Marcus as if they were witnessing an old scar being torn open right before them. On Mia's live stream, hundreds of thousands of comments flooded in at once. "My God, I am crying. He kept that paper for 26 years. She really is the same attendant from the past." Mia's hands shook, but she kept filming tears welling in her own eyes. "Uncle Marcus," she whispered. "You kept it all these years?" Hannah gasped, stepping back, the paper clutched in her hands like a confession sealed by time. And then something no one expected happened. Hannah turned to Evan, her voice barely a breath. "Evan, bring me a notebook and a pen." Evan froze. You're going to bring them to me," Hannah said, and for the first time during the flight, her voice was not commanding, but pleading. Evan hurried off. Hannah stood alone beneath the warm cabin lights, her shoulders curled inward as if awaiting a storm. When Evan returned with paper and pen, Hannah looked at Marcus, then at the old paper, trembling in her grasp. She understood there were wounds only the one who caused them could open. Hannah stepped into the galley. No one followed. The cabin was silent except for the faint hum of the aircraft cutting through air. Minutes passed. Evan stood motionless. Mia set her phone down more gently. Marcus gazed out the window. Then Hannah emerged. The jump seat she had sat in earlier was empty, but in her hands she held another sheet of paper, brand new and clean, yet the handwriting shook violently, as though her soul trembled through every stroke. She walked slowly toward Marcus, and then, in a gesture that stunned the entire cabin, she knelt. A collective gasp moved through the passengers. Mr. Hale Hannah lifted the sheet of paper with both hands. "I do not expect forgiveness. I do not expect acceptance. But I needed to write this." Marcus looked down. Hannah unfolded the paper. The words she had written were heavy, like each one was soaked in the weight of 26 years. "I have served for 26 years without ever asking whether the way I looked at someone could wound them. I was wrong when I wrote that report in the year 1999. I am wrong today. I was wrong to let suspicion become habit. I am sorry. Not by procedure, not for the airline, but for the man who carried this pain for 26 years. Evan bowed his head. A woman in row 1 cried openly. A man placed a hand over his heart. Mia kept live streaming, though her own hands trembled so hard the image shook. Marcus took the paper. He said nothing. His eyes held no anger, no satisfaction, only the quiet of someone who has carried pain so long that even tears have learned not to fall. He folded the sheet and placed it in his case beside the one from 26 years ago, like placing the final period on a long-suffering sentence. "This is not forgiveness," Marcus said softly, his voice carrying through the cabin louder than any engine. "This is acknowledgement." Hannah bowed her head, deeper tears falling to the airplane floor in heavy drops. And sometimes, Marcus continued, acknowledgement is already difficult enough to begin. Silence filled the cabin, not tense, not fearful, but a silence thick with relief, as if everyone had witnessed a soul being washed clean in the sky. The plane slipped into a thick cloud layer, white light flooding the cabin and reflecting across Marcus's features, serene yet still marked by the cracks of his past. But for the first time in 26 years, that pain no longer belonged to him alone. It had been seen, heard, acknowledged. And at 30,000 feet above the world, Marcus Hale closed his eyes, letting the passing clouds draw a curtain over a past he had carried for more than half his life. The soft hum of the Boeing 787's engines continued like the steady breathing of a sleeping giant, Yet inside the first-class cabin, no one felt as though they were on an ordinary flight anymore. Everything unfolding around them felt like a ritual of cleansing, painful quiet, and leaving behind a kind of shining imprint on everyone who witnessed it, while Hannah Boyd still knelt on the floor, tears running in long streaks down her hands. Marcus Hale closed the leather case that now held 2 sheets of paper from 2 different eras, one that had broken him years ago, and one that had finally made the person who caused the wound bow her head. Then he set the case down and inhaled slowly. The calm he felt was not the triumph of someone who won. It was the release of someone finally freed. Evan Pierce stepped back a few paces, his hands trembling so badly he had to grip the seat back to steady himself. He looked at Marcus, and for the first time in his life understood something he had never truly noticed before, that power does not come from rank or title or uniform. It comes from the ability to confront your own past. Evan swallowed hard, then stepped forward. Mr. Hale, his voice cracked. Marcus lifted his eyes, not angry. Evan bowed his head, his shoulders shaking, as if he were releasing a truth he had buried inside himself for far too long. "I am sorry," he whispered. "Not just for today, but for every time I saw something wrong and said nothing. I always thought staying silent was staying neutral. But now I understand silence is complicity." His words cut through the soft air, not like a blade of harm, but like a blade carving open a path to truth many people avoided in these polished first-class cabins. Marcus nodded gently, his eyes deep like water reflecting the night sky. "Young man," he said, his voice warm and low. "Numbness to injustice is not strength. It is how people turn themselves into stone." Evan's eyes filled. "I will remember that." "I swear." Marcus did not answer, but in his gaze was something like quiet faith in the generation behind him, the one still young enough to change things. In the row behind Mayor Alvarez, the 17-year-old girl with the phone on a tripod watched Marcus with eyes blurred by tears. She stepped forward, her phone still in her hand, but no longer recording. She had ended the live stream the moment Hannah knelt, because she understood some moments were not for display, but for empathy. "Mr. Marcus Meir," said her voice, trembling but steady. I want to thank you." Marcus looked at her, his gaze softening. For what child Meir clutched her phone like it was armor? For not stepping back? She drew in a breath, her eyes shining like stars beyond the window. For standing up for people like my dad? Marcus froze. 1 beat, then 2. Your father Meir nodded. My dad is a software engineer. He is smart, brilliant, even he built systems for years. But he is always overlooked at work, in meetings at airports. He stayed silent so long he lost faith in himself. Her voice broke. I have never seen him smile like he was proud of himself. But when I live-streamed you, he saw it, and I saw him cry. Marcus felt something tighten deeply in his chest, not pain, but recognition, the realization that his suffering was not one man's burden, but the burden of thousands who had been treated as though they did not look enough like those who belonged in privileged spaces. He placed a hand on Mia's shoulder. What is your father's name? Daniel Alvarez. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. I know him. Mia gasped. You know my dad. He worked at Interface Systems, Marcus said quietly. One of the most patient men I ever met. I do not remember him speaking much, but I remember his eyes. There was always something he wanted to say, but no one bothered to listen. Mia burst into tears. Marcus nodded gently, as if sharing a sorrow carried by 2 generations. He deserves to be heard. And today I hope he finally felt that. Mia sobbed and hugged Marcus, not with pity, but with the fierce embrace of someone holding the person who had spoken aloud the truth her family had carried in silence. The other passengers watched without a word. No whispers, no judgments. Because for the first time, first class was not a place of privilege. It was a place of truth. A few rows away, Hannah still knelt, clutching her head, eyes swollen. But now no one looked at her with hatred. They looked with the understanding that even those who cause harm eventually must face the darkness inside themselves. And they looked at Marcus with reverence, because he didn't use his power to destroy, but to awaken. A soft ding filled the cabin. The lights shifted to a gentle nighttime glow. The plane was entering calmer skies. Evan straightened, drew a deep breath and said, I will get you some water. Marcus smiled. Thank you. Evan returned with a sealed bottle, though his hands still shook slightly. Not from fear of Marcus, but from fear of what silence can create if no one breaks it. Fear of becoming another Hannah Boyd someday. When he set the bottle on Marcus's table, he whispered, I want to do what is right. Marcus replied softly. Then begin now. Evan nodded. His eyes were red, but changed no longer, evasive, no longer fearful. They held the spark of someone who had just learned the true strength of courage. The intercom chimed, and the captain's voice, calmer, now filled the cabin. We are at a stable altitude. Cabin lighting will be reduced. Marcus looked out the window. White layers of cloud drifted past the moonlight, reflecting off the aircraft's wing like a silver blade. And he thought for 26 years he had learned to live with the wound. But today, for the first time, that wound was no longer invisible. It had been seen, acknowledged, and in being seen, it had begun to heal. Marcus closed his eyes, not to rest, but to feel what it meant to fly without carrying the weight of a yellowed piece of paper, because that weight had been shared among the hearts in this cabin. And high above the world in seat 2, a man finally began learning how to breathe like someone who was respected. The thin moonlight sliced through the dark sky like a blade pouring into the first-class cabin through the curved windows of the Boeing 787, coating the space in a silver-blue glow. Cold, yet carrying an uncanny power to heal. Marcus Hale leaned his head gently against the seat in 2. The bottle of water Evan had set down, still chilled to the touch. Yet inside him, a heat was rising, as though an invisible flame was burning through every layer of pain he had carried for 26 years. No one spoke, but every person in the cabin drifted into a kind of silence they had never experienced on any flight in their lives, the silence of people who had just watched the truth surface and had seen themselves reflected in it. In that stillness, Mia Alvarez's phone screen lit up with exploding notifications. Live stream views, 187,000, 192,000, 200,000. She looked at Marcus, her gaze no longer the curiosity of a teenager, but the gaze of someone watching history being written. Mr. Marcus Mia whispered, though no one told her to lower her voice, the last clip is spreading fast online. Everyone is talking about you. Marcus opened his eyes, glancing at the girl as if seeing a version of himself from the past, a version untouched by injustice. What are they saying? He asked, his voice deep like the night wind. Mia held out her phone. The comments rushed by like a waterfall. The man from seat 2A. He represents all of us. It's all of, I am an engineer. I know exactly how he feels. 26 yaws carrying one sheet of paper. My God, I am crying in my living room. No one should be dragged out of a seat they paid for. Marcus Hale. That name will go down in history. Marcus read a few lines, then gently placed his hand on the phone, not to take it, but to lower it to the seat beside him. Maybe he whispered, "This is no longer just my story." Evan stood nearby, hearing those words, and clenched his fists. He could feel the truth radiating outward from the cabin, like heat from an old wound that had finally been opened. Mr. Hale, Evan began carefully, though the fear from earlier had vanished. I think people need to see what happened, not just to blame, but to change. Marcus looked at him. His eyes were deep and peaceful like dark water under the moon. "Do you think you can stand on the right side?" Evan inhaled, his lips trembling slightly. "It is not what I think it is what I have to do." Hearing that from a 26-year-old suddenly reminded Marcus of himself. 2 decades earlier, young, hopeful, believing doing good was enough. But the world had not been fair to people like him, and he silently hoped Evan's generation would not inherit the same wounds. Farther back, a man with salt and pepper hair leaned toward his wife, his eyes red. "Do you see?" he said. "This is not about a seat. It is about respect." His wife nodded, wiping tears with a tissue, though she had never met Marcus before. She did not even know he was a CEO until the cabin had erupted in the announcement from headquarters. But what she saw more clearly than any title was this: he was a human being who had been hurt, and he was rising from that pain. As if to break the heaviness in the cabin, the plane's speaker chimed with a calming tone. "This is the captain. Flight conditions are stable. We are entering smooth air." But no one truly listened, because another storm inside the cabin was finally quieting a storm of pride, memory, and rebirth. Hannah Boyd still sat in the folding jump seat, her eyes swollen and red, her face pale as though she had been hollowed out. But for the first time, no one looked at her with accusation. They looked at her as a lesson, a reminder that sometimes the one who causes harm is the one who must live with that mistake the longest. After a long while, soft footsteps echoed. Mia turned and saw a middle-aged white man in a grey suit approaching Marcus. He hesitated a moment, then said, "I want to apologize." Marcus looked up. "For what?" The man exhaled deeply, as if gathering the courage to confess something long buried, for being one of those people who looked at you the way they looked at you today. Not out of malice, but out of carelessness. And sometimes carelessness is worse than malice. Marcus held the man's gaze. His eyes were not sharp this time. They softened. Because he understood. And forgiveness always begins with understanding. "Thank you," Marcus said. Not for the apology, but for seeing the truth. The man placed a hand on the back of Marcus's seat before stepping away, his eyes glistening. Slowly, the people in the cabin were no longer strangers on a flight. They were witnesses to a moment that could change the way they saw the world and themselves. In seat 4C, a little girl around 10 tugged her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mum, I want to grow up to be like him." Her mother laughed softly through tears. "What part of him do you want to be like?" The girl answered her tiny voice, steady as a knock from the future. "I want to not let anyone push me out of my seat." Marcus heard it. He bowed his head slightly, a thin smile forming on his lips, the first smile since he entered the cabin. And beneath that smile was a powerful undercurrent. If a 10-year-old could understand the message, perhaps the world was not hopeless. The aircraft turned through a high cloud layer, moonlight falling across the cabin like a spotlight on the protagonist of a play, no one rehearsed, yet one that unfolded with heart-breaking perfection. Marcus looked outside. The city lights below blurred through the clouds like memories long buried rising again. He thought of his mother, the woman who sat beside him in the flight of 1999, the one who held his hand tight as they were dragged out of first class. "It is all right, baby," she said then. "You will find your place in the world again." And now in seat 2A, he whispered to himself, "I found it, Mom." A light feeling settled over Marcus, as if, for the first time in years, he could breathe air that did not carry the scent of suspicion, as if the weight of the past had finally loosened its grip. Maya sat in the seat next to him, staring out the window with him. "Mr. Marcus," she asked softly, "do you regret doing all of this?" Marcus tilted his head toward her. Moonlight carved the lines of a man who had been hurt, who had fought, who had risen, and who had finally been seen. "No," he said. "I only regret staying silent for so long." The cabin grew quiet again, but it was no longer the silence of tension. It was the silence of hearts that had just learned a truth sometimes. When one person dares to stay seated, the whole world must stop and listen. And at 30,000 feet beneath the silver moon of the night sky, Marcus Hale sat in seat 2, and not as a victim of his past, but as a light opening the way to a different future. A future in which people are not judged for who they are, but respected simply because they exist. A future that began right here on this flight. In this very seat, 2A, as the Boeing 787 continued slicing through the night clouds, the first-class cabin fell into a silence so profound that one could hear the rustle of fabric, the swallow of a throat, and the faint, metallic vibrations beneath their feet. But this silence was no longer pressure. It was the softening of hearts that had just witnessed justice bloom like a streak of light in the darkness. Marcus Hale sat in seat 2. Eyed the chair, now a symbol of the entire flight, his hand resting lightly on his leather case, as if holding a piece of his own soul inside it. The chill from the bottle Evan had brought still lingered, yet what truly warmed Marcus was something else, the realization that today he no longer had to carry his wound alone. Every passenger in the cabin, from the silver-haired woman in the first row to the young student in row 5, looked at him with the gaze of people who had seen a truth they could no longer turn away from. The phone vibrated softly. Mia glanced at it, startled. "Mr. Marcus, the media is already picking it up." She tilted the screen so Marcus could see the cascade of notifications. CNN breaking passenger wrongfully challenged on North Star Flight Force's CEO apology. BBC Airborne confrontation exposes long-standing discrimination. Washington Post from seat 2. 26 years of a buried voice. Hashtag see it too. A trending. Marcus read the lines, his eyes deep and still like a lake stirred by a faint breeze. He did not feel joy. He did not feel pride. He only felt strange. For the first time in 26 years, the truth was no longer confined to the yellowed sheet of paper he had carried, but reflected in the eyes of hundreds of thousands of people outside who understood him. Mia whispered, her voice trembling, "They are calling you the one brave enough to do what so many never dared." Marcus shook his head gently. "I only did what was necessary." But Mia answered immediately without hesitation. "But you are the only one courageous enough to do it." Evan, standing nearby, watched quietly. Those words made heat rise along his spine, as if someone were igniting the remaining silence within him. He stepped closer to Marcus and said softly, I want to make a promise. Marcus turned to him, eyes attentive. Evan swallowed and said, From today, I will never let anyone be treated the way you were treated. Not while I am present. Marcus saw in his eyes something he rarely saw in adults, untainted honesty, courage unsharpened by experience. He nodded gently. Remember this, he said, slowly standing on the right side is not always easy, but if you do not dare, you will lose yourself. Evan bowed his head, eyes red. I understand. In the rear of the cabin, Hannah Boyd still sat silently, the confessional paper in her lap, her eyes red. But in that gaze, something had shifted, no longer the defensive hardness of someone in power, but the pain of a person confronting a truth they had avoided their whole life. Another flight attendant approached, placing a hand gently on Hannah's shoulder, without a word. Some moments do not require speech, and this was one of them. Suddenly the intercom chimed with the captain's voice, but this time it was more than a flight announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say that the crew witnessed a remarkable moment on this flight. A moment that I believe will make all of us reconsider how we view one another. Absolute silence fell over the cabin. No one moved. I want to thank Mr. Marcus Hale for reminding us, those of us in aviation, that respect is not a privilege. It is a duty. A small sob echoed from somewhere in the cabin. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling his heart tremble lightly. The captain ended with a single sentence, yet one that struck every heart. Today we have all seen the true meaning of belonging to a place. Evan exhaled, placing his hand on the edge of Marcus's seat in a silent gesture of support. Maya put her phone down, wiping her tears with her sleeve. A few passengers placed hands over their hearts. Some bowed their heads. Everyone understood that they had witnessed something far beyond a flight incident. It was a reminder, a lesson, a wake-up call. And then, as the 787 began its descent, the cabin lights dimmed gently. Marcus opened his eyes. He looked out the window where the horizon glimmered with the first light of dawn. 26 years, he whispered. And finally the sun rises. Maya heard him and smiled through her tears. It is not just rising for you, she said, but for everyone who has ever been pushed from the seat that was rightfully theirs. Marcus watched the dawn light glimmer across the cloud layers. For the first time in his life, he didn't see the sky as a place of pain, but as a place he had reclaimed. And that light, the newly born light, didn't shine only upon the sky. It shone directly into the hearts of everyone in the cabin. It illuminated the moment when a man in Seat 2A had changed the way the world perceives respect. As the first rays of dawn began to filter through the curved windows of the first-class cabin, the sun had not fully risen, yet its light was enough to bathe the space in a gentle, warm glow, making the passengers feel as if they were part of another story, another world. The Boeing 787 began its descent, the fuselage vibrating lightly like a long exhale after a night of tension. The lights of Washington, D.C. appeared in the distance, small but sharp, like flickering hopes on the faces of those who had just endured a psychological earthquake. Marcus Hale remained in Seat 2. His spine, straight eyes, calm yet profound, as if he could see through the thick glass, through the last layer of clouds to what awaited on the ground. That steadfastness, quiet yet commanding, made everyone around him want to watch him in silence a little longer. Evan stood nearby, hands clasped together, eyes full of gratitude. Maya held her phone, but she was not filming. not live streaming, simply holding it as a reminder of what had just happened and respecting the moment as something sacred. Hannah Boyd still sat in the jump seat, back slightly hunched, the confession paper in her lap like irrefutable evidence. But in her reddened eyes, there was no longer fear, nor the rigid self-defense of someone in authority. It was introspection, the dismantling of an ego, long convinced of its rightness, and the transformation of a person who realized she needed to learn a new way of seeing the world. A voice came over the cabin intercom, the captain's voice slow, steady, as if he too had been changed by the night. "We are preparing to land at Reagan National Airport. Thank you, passengers, for accompanying us on this meaningful flight." The words, "meaningful flight," were not mere pleasantries. Each syllable struck deep into the emotions of everyone present. The aircraft descended more rapidly, causing passengers to lean slightly forward. A soft click echoed from the landing gear deployment, the floor vibrating lightly. No one spoke. No one moved. Each person was absorbed in their own reflection, as if the sky was not the space they had just flown through, but the place where they had just been reborn. As the wheels touched the runway, the frictional groom did not startle the cabin. It felt like the conclusion of a ritual, the turning of a chapter, a curse lifted. The plane slowed, then came to a complete stop. The cabin lights glowed a warm yellow, no longer harsh, but gentle like the light of peace after a storm. When the ding signaled that seatbelts could be unfastened, no one stood immediately. They looked at Marcus, not waiting for him to lead, but to honor the moment for him, the man who had held this seat through a lifetime of endurance. Marcus unfastened his seatbelt, lifted his leather case, and rose with the calm only those who have overcome the greatest pain can possess. Evan stepped aside, his gaze filled with reverence as if before a teacher. Mia smiled softly, eyes glistening. "Mr. Marcus, I will tell this story to the world." Marcus placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "It is not about me." Mia laughed softly. "I know. It is about everyone who has ever been underestimated." The cabin door opened and the morning light flooded in. The cold early air of Washington swept through, carrying the scent of land of life, of the promise that after today, everything would change. Hannah rose, slightly leaning from sitting too long. When Marcus approached, she bowed deeply, not to ask forgiveness, but to acknowledge that sometimes such a bow is the beginning of morality. Marcus paused for a moment, then simply nodded a nod, like the period ending a chapter of life. He did not look back at the 26-year-old paper, nor the pain, nor the moment he had been pulled from his seat. He stepped onto the jet bridge, each step echoing across the metal floor like a declaration. "Today I reclaim my seat." As Marcus reached the front of the bridge, hundreds of camera flashes went off. Reporters were waiting rapid-fire questions. "Mr. Hale, can you tell us, did you activate echo mode? Do you consider this an act of defiance? What message do you want to send to America?" But Marcus walked straight eyes, not meeting any camera. He was not there to expose his wound. He was there to heal it. At the end of the jet bridge, a young woman ran up. Dad Marcus stopped. It was Sophia Hale, 19, eyes full of worry, mixed with relief. She hugged him tightly. "I watched everything. I was afraid you'd get hurt again." Marcus embraced her, his hand on her hair as he had once comforted a trembling child. "No, Soph. Today I am not being pushed down again." Sophia smiled through her tears. "Dad, you're trending all over the internet." Marcus chuckled softly for the first time on the flight. "It is enough that you know who I am. Father and daughter stepped off the jet bridge, entering the airport bathed in the glow of dawn. Behind them, the first-class passengers stood in quiet admiration. They were not looking at a man of power. They were looking at a person who had taught them how to stand up against wrong. And as Marcus entered the terminal, the flight display above reflected the image of a man no longer carrying the wounds from Seat 4 years ago. He had not only landed in Washington, D.C., he had landed in his own life, lighter, freer, and finally fully seen. Marcus Hale stepped off the jet bridge with deliberate weighted steps, his leather case still tucked neatly at his side, as if carrying an entire moment of history within it. The airport terminal flooded with the first morning light, reflecting on wide-eyed faces who had just witnessed an unprecedented story. A man who had been dragged from his seat 26 years ago now returned to claim his rightful place and send a powerful message to an entire generation. Sophia Hale, his daughter, walked beside him, eyes still red, holding her phone but not live streaming. She understood that this moment didn't belong to social media, but to courage and justice. Inside the terminal, the first-class passengers who had been silently observing stood and applauded quietly, or looked at Marcus with awe and respect. They realized that today was not just a flight, but a ceremony marking the true power of steadfastness and justice. Most of the flight attendants lowered their heads, pride gone, their eyes reflecting a new awareness that every action, every attitude leaves an imprint on those they serve. A few whispered to one another, glances furtive but filled with admiration. He is the man from Seat 2A, and no one can move him. Jason Merrick, CEO of North Star Airways, stood in the distance, phone still in hand, nodding lightly but profoundly. He knew that today his system had not only been challenged, but awakened to a lesson in respect and fairness. Media waiting outside the terminal, erupted cameras, microphones, and the click of shutters jostling together, but Marcus did not rush to answer. He understood that his presence and the steadfast act in Seat 2A had already spoken volumes. Sophia held her father's hand, voice trembling. Dad, people are watching everywhere. I have never seen anyone like you. Marcus smiled, eyes both warm and serious. You are not seeing it alone, Sophia. The whole world is seeing. And now everyone knows that no one has the right to remove a person from the place they belong. Father and daughter walked through the terminal, each step light, but powerful, moving past crowds of passengers and staff, as if walking on the stage of a history just written. Each step Marcus took was a silent declaration. Courage and justice need not be shouted. They radiate from the most steadfast action. Outside, a sleek black SUV waited. Sophia jumped into the passenger seat. Marcus opened the door and stepped in the leather case, resting on his lap. As the vehicle rolled through the sunlit streets, the light glinted on both of them, reflected in the car windows, and in their eyes, the light of freedom, of justice, and of a new beginning. News spread quickly. Social media exploded with thousands of tweets and hashtags, Seattle Justice, in the skies. International media broadcast Mia Alvarez's clip, commenting on the moment Marcus stood firm against injustice, awakening the entire North Star Airways system. Meanwhile, Jason Merrick convened urgently with his legal and technical teams, ordering immediate implementation of Marcus's demands, public suspension of Hannah Boyd, initiation of a 5-year independent audit, and creation of an independent passenger reporting channel. While airline staff worried about the repercussions, Marcus remained calm, eyes fixed on the window, watching the city awaken under the morning light. He reflected on 26 years of pain, the yellowed paper, each suspicious glance, and realized that today was not the end, but the beginning of a new era, where fairness and respect were no longer distant ideals. Sophia looked at her father, her voice soft but steady. "Dad, you've changed the world, haven't you?" Marcus smiled, placing his hand on hers. "It's just the beginning. Child, beginning from seat 2A. And so the vehicle glided through the streets of Washington, D.C., dawn light shining on Marcus Hale, the man from seat 2A, who not only reclaimed his seat, but returned the right to everyone who had ever been pushed aside. First class, the airport terminal, and all of North Star Airways would never see the same way again. A story concluded, but a new chapter began. The morning light fell on Marcus's face, and in that moment, the world was silent, allowing a man who had triumphed over injustice to sit quietly, leaving an indelible mark. From the perspective of an expert in organizational culture and corporate power, the story of Marcus Hale is not merely a personal incident, but a living testament to the strength of persistence, courage, and justice. When an individual is brave enough to stand up for themselves while setting a standard for the entire system, the surrounding work and service environment are profoundly affected, compelling leaders to awaken and reassess their operational mechanisms. This is a powerful lesson on respecting people and on how a small yet righteous action can create a vast ripple effect. If you believe in the power of steadfastness and justice, like to spread the message, subscribe so you don't miss the next inspiring story, and share this story with your friends, so everyone can realize that sometimes staying firmly in your position can change the world. Don't forget to leave a brief comment with the phrase, "Respect people," to join the dialogue on fairness and dignity.